This week's video is going to be very short and rather unusual because I want to talk to you about the next project I am planning to weave with my hand spun yarn. So this is the yarn. I made bats from raw fleece from a Shetland sheep by the name of Berry White, which makes me so happy. I am really, really hoping that this sheep had a very deep voice and sounded kind of sexy every time he bawed. But that's just me. So this is one of the colors I want to use, and the other is a variegated set of skeins that I made from a Greenwood Fibers colorway called Winter Scene. And the inspiration photo had a beautiful red cardinal sitting on a branch in a snowy forest. So that was the inspiration for this. And I tried, but I think I failed to capture that same effect when I made my spinning choices about how to spin this colorway, which, remember, like all of Carolyn uh, colorways in her boxes, her monthly subscription, had one 4-ounce braid of a variegated and then two 2-ounce braids of solids to go with it. So I feel that this yarn, though successful, didn't have enough snow in it. So when I weave it together with Mr. Berry White here, the having a solid white as either my warp or my weft, I'm not sure which yet, will kind of soften out, will add more white into this calculation. So that's the plan. And the part that's really cool about this plan of mine is I'm going to do something I haven't done for a really long time, which is to go back to this classic book, Marguerite Porter Davison's Handweaver's Pattern Book, and search it for inspiration. So this book, it has been out of print for many years. You can still, if you're very lucky, find used copies. And I believe this was actually the second edition of it. There was an earlier edition with a green cover. So if you ever get the chance to purchase a copy of A Hand Weaver's Pattern Book by Marguerite Porter Davison, do it. Don't hesitate, pay any amount of money, because this book is a treasure trove of patterns. You can see from Mrs. Davison's dates that she has been gone for, oh my gosh, 75 years now, thereabouts. And she was of that generation of weavers who went around trying to organize, catalog, and systematize weaving patterns that weavers had been using for decades, if not centuries, in various parts of the eastern US and probably other places that I'm not familiar with. So this is the result of her work, and you can see just from a quick glance at the table of contents, which goes on, that it has gazillions of weaving drafts in it. And it's an interesting book. So it was published in, should have done this before, sorry. This one is produced in 1994. The earlier version, I don't remember the date, but this is an era when computers for publishing were just in their infancy. So somebody hand drew all these pattern drafts, and Mrs. Davison wove every single one of these. So here's the cool part about using a book like this. One of the cool parts is because the swatches, the woven swatch samples, are all black and white, color isn't getting in the way. The second thing is you can see, and I've tried to zoom into this a little bit. Okay, on this one threading for 4-thread herringbone weave, this one threading, she shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different ways to treadle, all on the same threading. And that means that, oops, sorry, I meant to zoom in there, that you could, if you wanted to just weave samples to see how colors would play out, which is my plan, you would thread the loom You would thread the heddles on 4 shafts. Oh, and she even kindly tells you how many threads are in each repeat, which can make your calculations later much simpler. So you thread this and you tie up, and then you just change how you treadle for each of the samples. And suddenly you've got a great big long set of options to choose from when it comes to finalizing what you want to do in your pattern. So obviously my plan is not to use up my precious hand spun on the sample until I get further along. But what I am going to do is narrow down a couple of patterns that I think will work really, really well for a scarf for someone in my family. And then I will just try out a couple of treadlings and see what strikes me. But I want to mention a couple of things that it's always important to remember when you're using this pattern book. The first is that Mrs. Davison wrote this book for looms that have sinking sheds, which is to say, when you press on the treadle, a shaft doesn't go up, it goes down. So where she's got X's, you actually need to tie up your loom in what's blank. Otherwise, you're weaving the fabric from the back, the wrong side, if you will, but you're weaving it from the back instead of, so it'll be the opposite of whatever she's shown here. And that is often a tricky thing for us to remember, because by the time she died, I think even most looms that hand weavers had in their homes were rising shed looms. So whenever you start to weave something from a pattern, from any pattern draft, if it looks like it's not turning out right, try grabbing a mirror, a big mirror, and looking at the cloth from the underside, or physically get down under the loom and see what that does for you. See if that changes the equation any. And then if you realize, oh, I am weaving it with the so-called wrong side up, you just redo the tie-ups. It's easy peasy. Or if you're on a lever loom, it's even easier. You just start raising the levers for the boxes that are white, not the ones with the X's in them. So when I look at these patterns, and I've already sussed out a couple that I think might look really attractive in a scarf for a young man, like for instance, this interrupted twill could look really nice, or this. Sometimes they have names and sometimes they don't. Sometimes the names, like Halverson, is pretty certain was either a weaver whom she met or the name of a region where she was researching at the time. So she gave names to a lot of these. Or this herringbone plaid could turn out really well. But like I said, before I start with any of my precious hand spun, I'm going to make some samples. I will thread my loom. And again, look how simple many of these threadings are, as I try desperately to adjust my camera. These threadings are really simple, and you get infinite variation. Well, okay, not infinite, but a number of variations that you can choose from. Miss Davison also did something super cool for a bunch of her patterns. And let me see if I can find the one I was looking at. See, this is why you need to mark stuff before you turn the camera on. Okay, so this is the one I was looking at earlier. She very helpfully noted that this fabric is reversible, which is kind of unusual for a twill, unless it's a 2-2 twill, because twills, by their very nature, form diagonal lines, and unless it is what's called a balanced twill, a 2-2 twill, when you start weaving them, the front side and the back side of the fabric are different. So this is what's called a straight draw. You thread the shafts 1, 2, 3, or 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you can probably reverse them without doing damage to the thing. Um, but I can virtually guarantee that this pattern would not look the same on both sides of the weaving. That on the reverse side, these vertical cool stripes going in an undulating pattern would be the dark color, and the dark pieces between them, the dark weft between them, would actually be the white warp or the lighter colored warp. But there's so much fun to be had, and I encourage you to try just weaving some samples. It is not a waste of time or materials or anything else, just to play around and understand how a book like this works, so that when you want to make your own pattern, you know how to do that. So I want to mention one last thing before we call it a day for this week, which is how to uh, how to make a symmetrical weaving if you're designing your own textile for whatever purpose. Actually, I want to mention two more things, and I better mention the first one before I forget it. The first is that I'm going to be using yarn that is considerably heavier than what she wove her samples in. So this particular pattern, this diamonds and twill, it looks all nice and pretty, but it was meant for things like table linens or kitchen towels. It was not meant for worsted weight hand spun yarns necessarily. And so the scale, if I weave a sampler using this pattern with worsted weight yarn, it's not going to look nearly as petite, as dainty as what is shown in Mrs. Davison's sample. The other thing I want to mention, and you will see this if you've looked at any number, if you've looked at pattern drafts for any length of time, is she's giving you the bare bones, which is A, B. So you would thread A, B across the width of your loom, but you would probably want to do what's called a balance, which is instead of doing an even number of, or the same number of A and B, you would want the threading on the left side of your loom to end with A. So you do A, B, but then you'd finish with block A or pattern A, because this would give you a perfectly balanced weave. If you didn't do that, you would end up with, and if I spent a lot of time, I could figure out which of these are A, B, but you would end up with something that is unbalanced, like it would stop here instead of finishing with a complete bit of these two block things or something like that. So when if you see something in a weaving draft that, especially in the threading, that confuses you, 9.5 times out of 10, what the designer has chosen to write up in the threading is how to do a balance so that you end up with a symmetrical weave. So grab a book like this. There are newer versions. There's a similar book for 8-shaft patterns. There's a newer book for 4-shaft patterns with color, which you might or might not. You might find the color distracting, and if so, just take a photo of the swatches with your camera or your phone and then turn it to grayscale, and then the color won't distract you anymore. But there's lots of resources, but a book like this is just a wealth of weaving knowledge. And when I think of the time Mrs. Davison took first to research all these patterns, to collect them, and then to weave them all, and then somebody had to photograph them all, it reminds me how we weavers today are standing on the shoulders of giants.